In space, no one can hear you scream, but you already knew that, didn't you? Well, here's some stuff you might not have heard about Hollywood's scariest sci-fi franchise. Michael Biehn is such a natural fit for the role of Dwayne Hicks that it's impossible to imagine anyone else playing the character.
I'd like to keep this handy for close encounters.
As it happens though, Biehn was James Cameron's second choice for the role. Hicks was very nearly played by James Remar, who was 2 weeks into filming Aliens when he was arrested for drug possession. Remar was fired from the movie, and Cameron filled the role by calling up Biehn, who had previously worked with the director on The Terminator. Cameron also salvaged some of Remar's work in long shots and scenes in which Hicks is only seen from behind. It's perhaps no wonder that Remar was kicked off Aliens. Aside from his arrest, he had ruffled feathers earlier on in production when he accidentally shot a hole in the set using a prop gun. The dummy round went right through the wall and into a set belonging to Little Shop of Horrors. While Remar recovered from his drug issues and went on to have a solid career as a character actor, he has since expressed regret over disappointing those that helped him land the part of Hicks. In a deleted scene from Alien, Ripley discovers that, having been captured by the alien earlier in the movie, Captain Dallas is slowly morphing into an egg. Speaking to Starburst magazine years later, James Cameron revealed that this method of reproduction is similar to the life cycle of the digger wasp. Cameron explained, "One of Alien's great attributes was that it set up a very weird biological process, but it has a basis in science fact all the way through, like the cycle of a digger wasp, which paralyzes its prey and injects an egg into the living body to mature." When he made Aliens, however, Cameron decided to do away with eggmorphing, which he once said was too restrictive for him as a storyteller. As he told Starburst, "There's a validity in all of that, but I dispense with it because we never saw that in the film anyway." And in the book Blockbuster, Cameron said, "In my story, the eggs come from somewhere else. At least that was my theory. So working from that theory, acres and acres of these quite large eggs, 2.5 to 3 feet tall, I began to focus on the idea of a hierarchical hive structure where the central figure is a giant queen whose role is to further the species." It's no easy task turning a group of actors into a troupe of battle-hardened space marines. Luckily, though, the crew on Aliens had some help.
Another glorious day in the Corps.
Al Matthews, a Vietnam veteran who served with the real Marines and plays Sergeant Apone in the film, was enlisted to teach the cast how to act like real soldiers. Speaking to Empire magazine in 2009, Matthews said, "Jim asked me to train them, and the main thing I had to teach those guys was never point a weapon at somebody and never walk around with your finger on the trigger. We use blanks, but they can do some damage." At the time, Matthews had 2 Purple Hearts to his name, and had earned no fewer than 11 other decorations and awards during his time in the military. Many Aliens fans were less than pleased with the opening of Alien 3, which infamously killed Newt, Hicks, and Bishop off screen.
Where are the others?
They didn't make it.
What?
They didn't survive.
And they weren't alone either. At Comic-Con in 2016, James Cameron said, "I thought it was dumb. I thought it was a huge slap in the face to the fans." Interestingly though, Cameron doesn't blame the film's director for this. He added, "David Fincher is a friend of mine, and he's an amazing filmmaker, unquestionably. That was kind of his first big gig, and he was getting vectored around by the studio, and he dropped into the production late, and they had a horrible script, and they were rewriting it on the fly. It was just a mess. I think it was a big mistake." Despite this, Cameron also made it clear that he never would have these choices if he had directed Alien 3. In Alien 3, Ripley shaves her head to comply with the standards of the prison planet Fiorina 161. And while many actors might be reluctant to lose their hair for the sake of one role, Sigourney Weaver could at least console herself with the $4 million payday she earned for working on the movie. When principal photography on Alien 3 ended, Weaver moved on to other projects, wearing a wig while her hair grew back. Unfortunately, Alien 3 then required reshoots, which meant that Weaver had to shave her head yet again. It wasn't all bad though. Thanks to a clause in her contract, she earned a bonus of $300,000 for cutting her hair one more time so they could complete the movie. What's more, Weaver has since admitted that she actually kinda liked her Alien 3 look. She once told the New York Times, "It was quite a great haircut. I kind of miss it." It's not often that an actor gets paid for a movie they're not in, but that's exactly what happened to Michael Biehn on Alien 3. As production on the third Alien movie began, Biehn learned through the grapevine that a cast of his likeness, originally made for Aliens, had been used to create a dummy version of Hicks. Suffice it to say, he wasn't too happy about this. Speaking to Ain't It Cool News years later, Biehn recorded, "I called my agent up and he called up Fox and said, You can't use Michael's image. They said, okay, we'll get back to you. I got a call from David Fincher saying, please, we'd really like to use your character. And first of all, I was like, F you for not putting me in the movie. Originally, this dummy was to be used for a scene in which a chestburster erupts from Hicks's body, and neither Bean nor James Cameron were happy about that. When the studio offered to use just a picture of Hicks instead, Bean accepted, on one condition. As he explained, they'd paid me a lot of money to use my picture in that movie. In Alien Resurrection, a clone of Ripley joins up with a band of space pirates. At one point in the movie, she beats the rest of the crew in a game of basketball, sinking her final shot through the hoop by tossing it back over her head without looking.
Nothing but net.
And guess what? Sigourney Weaver made that trick shot all by herself, even though director Jean-Pierre Jeunet was prepared to bring in a double to pull it off. Weaver practiced for 2 weeks to pull it off. By the time they got to set, she was averaging 1 basket for every 6 tries. An urban legend claims that Weaver made the shot on her first try, but it actually took 3 to make the basket. This was all the more impressive though, considering Jeunet made her stand even further away than planned. And Weaver's shot so impressed actor Ron Perlman that he couldn't hide his reaction, which had to be removed from the film in the edit. Although Alien Resurrection ended up being about a Ripley clone, the original plan was to follow a very different character. Sigourney Weaver had decided she was done with the Alien franchise after Alien 3 wrapped, and so the studio decided to produce a sequel about a clone of Newt.
We better get back, because it'll be dark soon, and they mostly come at night. Mostly.
Speaking to Starburst magazine, 20th Century Fox executive Jorge Saralegui explained, "We had the notion of having Newt cloned. The people at Fox liked the idea enough to say, okay, why don't you start working on it and find a writer? The first and only person I thought of was Joss Whedon. Whedon later developed a 30-page treatment in which an adult Newt clone hunts for xenomorphs on behalf of Weyland Yutani. Unfortunately for Whedon and Saralegui, the higher-ups at Fox balked at the idea of doing another Alien movie without Weaver. They ended up offering Weaver millions to return, while Whedon was set back to the drawing board. Newt, meanwhile, has remained dead ever since. Prometheus is a spiritual prequel to the Alien movies, providing an origin of sorts for the xenomorphs.
Big things have small beginnings.
Originally, though, it was supposed to be a direct sequel rather than a prequel. In these early stages, the project was titled Alien Engineers, which suggests that, if nothing else, the movie still would have involved a race of godlike aliens who turned up in Prometheus. Sadly, not much has ever been said about the original premise, but we do know that 20th Century Fox decided to take the movie in a different direction, severing many of the story's ties to the Alien universe. Damon Lindelof then reworked the script on Ridley Scott's behalf, turning it into a more standalone story that parallels the tale of Prometheus, who in Greek mythology gives humanity fire stolen from Mount Olympus. As a result of Lindelof's work, there are few connections between Prometheus, Covenant, and the main Alien series, other than the setting, tech, and xenomorphs, of course. Nobody handles fantasy and horror quite like Guillermo del Toro, and that's probably why he was offered the chance to direct the first Alien vs. Predator movie. Del Toro mustn't have been keen though, as he turned the movie down to make his classic comic book movie Hellboy instead. Rumors suggested that he was also in the running for AVP Requiem, but if those rumors were true, then he turned down that opportunity too. On top of that, Jorge Saralegui wanted to hire Del Toro for Alien Resurrection, but it seems 20th Century Fox wouldn't bite. In an interview with Alien vs. Predator Galaxy, Saralegui said, "It would have been interesting because it would have been expensive. Guillermo doesn't cut corners, but it would have been great." Fans have always been critical of the Alien vs. Predator films, and who could blame them? Still, it seems 20th Century Fox did try to do one thing right with the franchise. For a while, the studio wanted to bring in Arnold Schwarzenegger to play the legendary Predator hero Dutch Schaefer.
If it bleeds, we can kill it.
Unfortunately, the timing never worked out to allow Arnie to return to the franchise, either in AVP or the main Predator movies. In the case of Alien vs. Predator, Schwarzenegger agreed to show up if he lost his first run for the office of the Governor of California. The Governator won, of course, and so he never turned up in the movie. Apparently, he was never considered for a role in Requiem, although judging from audience and critical reactions to that movie, he's probably glad he dodged that bullet. If ticking off the fans wasn't enough, the Alien vs. Predator films also turned out to be a bummer for Ridley Scott and James Cameron. Apparently, the two directors were upset that the AVP movies and specifically the failure of Requiem killed off the Alien sequel they wanted to make together. Scott later told The Hollywood Reporter, "I think Alien vs. Predator was a daft idea, and I'm not sure it did very well or not, I don't know, but it somehow brought down the beast." And during a Reddit AMA, Cameron said, "Fox went ahead with Aliens vs. Predators, and I said, I really don't recommend that. You'll ruin the franchise. It's like Universal doing Dracula vs. the Werewolf, and then I lost interest in doing an Alien film." Despite this, Cameron has often expressed a desire to rectify what Alien 3 did to the characters from Aliens, but it remains to be seen whether he or Scott will get that chance. Fede Alvarez is a veteran in the world of horror filmmaking. No surprise then that someone with that kind of pedigree would draw on a classic for his own Alien movie. The inspiration for much of Alien Romulus comes from a deleted scene in Aliens, in which children can be seen playing at Hadley's Hope before the arrival of the xenomorphs. This prompted Alvarez to think about what it's like to be stuck in space as a young person. During an appearance on Q with Tom Power, he explained, "Once they're in their teens and 20s, they're going to rebel. No one's going to be on a planet for 50 years that has nothing for you but being a miner or a farmer." Alvarez pointed out that many young people rebel by spreading their wings and escaping to pastures new. And so the premise of Romulus was born. Rain and her friends are unusual protagonists for an Alien movie, sure, but if the movie's box office haul is anything to go by, audiences weren't bothered one bit. Although Alien Romulus was a hit with audiences and critics alike, one aspect of the movie was less well received. During one scene, the likeness of the late Ian Holm is applied to an android character named Rook. This moment was widely criticized, at least in part due to the poor quality of the effects. After the movie's release though, Fede Alvarez took note of these comments, and then he did something about it. Speaking to Empire magazine, he said, "We fixed it. We made it better for the release right now. I convinced the studio we need to spend the money and make sure we give the companies that are involved in making it the proper time to finish it and do it right. It's so much better." Alvarez later admitted that he hadn't been happy with the quality of the shots either, and agreed with fans that they looked rushed and unfinished in the movie's theatrical release.
What's required of me, sir?
To finish our mission.
The chestburster scene from the original Alien is one of the most famous and shocking moments in the history of cinema. Its origins, however, were somewhat less extraordinary. Dan O'Bannon apparently wrote the chestburster sequence following a particularly painful bout of indigestion related to his Crohn's disease. H.R. Giger later claimed that O'Bannon had been inspired by imagining the pain bursting out of him and leaving his body. Yet one famous director has suggested his movie was the real basis of this sequence. David Cronenberg has claimed that the xenomorph bears some striking similarities to the monster in his 1975 body horror movie Shivers, which was first released in the US as They Came From Within. Shivers features a parasite that, after living inside its host, burns its way out of their body before attacking other people's faces. During an interview with Fangoria, Cronenberg said, Dan O'Bannon later denied that he had ever seen Shivers, but John Landis swears he talked about them all the time and knew them very well. And it seems that Cronenberg's distaste for Alien goes far beyond this alleged plagiarism. He added, "The creature winds up as a man in a crocodile suit who chases a bunch of people around a room. I think that my own films do a lot more in touching a deep-seated nerve, more than the simple reaction that you don't want a crocodile to eat you. Alien was just a $300,000 B-movie with a $10 million budget." Dan O'Bannon once called H.P. Lovecraft the greatest horror writer who ever lived, and certainly Lovecraft's influence is palpable in O'Bannon's work. Alienness is something to be feared and loathed in Lovecraft's stories. Most famously, he built a whole universe around a group of cosmic horrors worshipped as gods by fearful humans. Lovecraft's most famous representation of the terrible unknown is Cthulhu, a being whose imprisonment in the sea is not dissimilar to the xenomorph's gestation within its human host. And Cthulhu threatens to break free, breach the surface, and wreak havoc among unsuspecting humans, just like the xenomorph. That's to say nothing of these creatures' darkest undertones either. Lovecraft-inspired horror novelist Stephen King has long considered Cthulhu to be a nightmarish symbol of sexual violence, and there's little doubt that O'Bannon and H.R. Giger followed similar themes in the creation of the xenomorph. H.R. Giger's designs were one part of a horrifying equation. Bringing them to life, though, required another kind of genius. Specifically, Alien benefited from the expertise of Carlo Rambaldi, a veteran creature effects artist who was frighteningly good at his work, as director Lucio Fulci knew all too well. In 1971, Fulci enlisted Rambaldi to provide special effects for his film A Lizard in a Woman's Skin. One scene called for the simulated mutilation of live dogs, and Rambaldi's effects were so realistic that the Italian courts charged Fulci and the producers with cruelty to animals. They were exonerated only after Rambaldi brought his props into the courtroom and explained how they worked. And let's face it, that's exactly the kind of guy you want working on your monster movie. Danny McBride's Tennessee is one of the most memorable characters in Alien Covenant, and it's no surprise either, as many of his qualities were derived from other iconic characters. He's obviously similar to Dallas, captain of the Nostromo in Alien, but Tennessee also owes a lot to Slim Pickens' Major T.J. Kong from Dr. Strangelove.
Well, boys, I reckon this is it. Nuclear combat toe-to-toe with the Ruskies.
This idea mainly came from Ridley Scott, who told McBride that the characters in Alien films need to convey what he called identifiable types, since they're often killed off so quickly. McBride also told The New Yorker he saw Tennessee as an homage to the character Slim Pickens, played in Dr. Strangelove, a southerner and something of a child but not an Of course, it's probably fair to say that Tennessee's fate is somewhat different to that of Major Kong.
If you could trace the origin of Alien back to one single point, it would have to be Dan O'Bannon's 1974 sci-fi comedy Dark Star. While attending USC, O'Bannon made a 7-minute horror suspense short film called Bloodbath. The project caught the attention of a young John Carpenter, also a student, and the two set out to make a science fiction movie for John Carpenter's master's thesis. They called their finished movie Dark Star, and it wasn't very good. It did have an alien in it, but unfortunately that alien was a beach ball with feet. According to O'Bannon, instead of the most impressive student film ever made, we had the least impressive professional film ever made. But that crappy film gave birth to a legend.
A couple of years down the line, I decided to do Dark Star as a horror movie instead of a comedy. And that was the germ of Alien.
Not many people saw Dark Star, but future Alien director Ridley Scott did, along with visionary Chilean-French filmmaker Alejandro Jodorowsky, and it left a lasting impression. Jodorowsky was so impressed with Dark Star that he hired O'Bannon to help him adapt Frank Herbert's space opera Dune for the big screen. The project ultimately tanked, but Alien was one of the many successful projects that rose from the ashes of Jodorowsky's ill-fated attempt. O'Bannon moved to Paris to work on Dune, which is where he met artist Christopher Foss, who'd later do design work for Alien, as well as future Alien designer H.R. Giger. Jodorowsky's philosophy of art design also heavily influenced O'Bannon's work on Alien. He would find his, quote, spiritual warriors and then put them together in one big room to work out a movie structure. Later, O'Bannon would use the same strategy to brainstorm about Alien, bringing together Foss, Giger, and cartoonists Mobius and Ron Cobb to hash out the design for their little sci-fi horror project. Ultimately, Brandywine Productions agreed to produce the film for 20th Century Fox, with Ridley Scott in the director's chair, but the Nostromo still had some turbulence ahead. According to O'Bannon, producers David Giller and Walter Hill wanted to completely redo his script. So that's exactly what they did. According to Giler, he and Hill added the feminist elements everyone is talking about. We gave the characters texture, functions. In O'Bannon's draft, they were totally different, military types, all men. We changed all the dialogue, every word of it. O'Bannon's original screenplay featured a xenomorph and the wrecked ship, and that's about where the similarities to the finished film end. Hill's and Giler's rewrites added Ripley and Dallas and the rest of the gang. Not to mention the whole vast corporate conspiracy subplot and the entire concept for human-looking androids, an idea that was already an Alien cornerstone by the first sequel.
Thank you.
But bizarrely, some drafts also had a time travel-based plotline featuring Jack the Ripper, Hercules, and Genghis Khan, like a Magic Treehouse book with murderous chest-bursting aliens. Then there's the alien that, against all odds, Scott and his team somehow made despite all the confusion. As artist Christopher Foss put it to Den of Geek, poor old Dan O'Bannon, the bloke whose concept it was, just got absolutely shafted. I kind of got the impression that Ridley was quietly going his own way, trying to get on with it and get it done. The Nostromo, the dark, claustrophobic spaceship where all the alien action takes place, is practically another character in the movie, and Chris Foss and Ron Cobb were essential to the creation of the vessel. But the final result didn't come right away. The team worked on the design for 5 whole months. Pretty much the whole time the producers were trying to find a director for the movie, and some of those designs got weird. Foss had endless spaceship designs suggesting submarines, diesel locomotives, Mayan interceptors, Mississippi riverboats, and jumbo space arcs. But in the end, they were simply too outlandish for the producers to get on board. The Nostromo's final design came from one of Ron Cobb's simpler sketches, and even then, Ridley Scott made the ship's modeler get rid of Cobb's original yellow color scheme in favor of the flat gray that made it into the film. Before Sigourney Weaver got the part of Ripley, none other than Meryl Streep was on the short list of candidates to be offered the role. Streep is, of course, ridiculously talented, and Alien probably would have been just fine with her in the lead role, but fate intervened. In 1978, Streep's romantic partner, actor John Cazale, passed away, and nobody felt comfortable interrupting her mourning to make the offer. As it turns out, Ripley wasn't even Sigourney Weaver's first choice. She said in an interview, "Actually, the part I wanted to play was Lambert, Veronica Cartwright's part. In the first script I read, Lambert just cracked jokes the whole time. That's the character I could identify with." And while Weaver wanted the part of Lambert, Veronica Cartwright was dead set on playing Ripley. It was only just before shooting began that Cartwright was told their roles had been switched.
I get a call and they said, "Okay, you need to come in for your wardrobe for Lambert." I said, "Oh no, I'm not Lambert, I'm Ripley." No, you're Lambert.
Obviously, the decisions all worked out in the end, but it's interesting to consider how close we were to getting a completely different movie. Ridley Scott worked hard to preserve the less is more aesthetic that made Alien so terrifying, and that meant cutting a lot of scenes from the final film. Some of the biggest cuts were made because they looked kinda stupid. For example, Lambert's death is haunting because most of it is implied and off-screen. The camera cuts away just before the alien gets her, so we don't actually see what happens. But her death was filmed. It just looked way too cheesy. By the same token, Brett's death in the final film is terrifying, but the extended cut of that scene is borderline absurd.
Hey, I'm not gonna hurt you.